So you're looking to buy a belt drive for your chopper. And why wouldn't you be? This is one of my favorite mods that I did on my bike. I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in giving the setup a shot. But one of the questions I get from you guys all the time is, hey, Grease, there's so many different belt drive kits out there. Which one should I buy? That's what we're talking about today. I'm Grease, you're watching Grease's Garage, and I'm gonna help you skip the struggle. All right, guys, so like I said in the intro, this is a very, very broad topic with a ton of different variables, and it actually took me quite a long time to figure out how to make this video right here so that it's helpful for you no matter what bike you are riding. And the way I decided to approach this topic is with what I call the question funnel for the belt drive kits. So we are going to start with the most broad questions at the beginning and work our way down with more and more and more specific questions until there's only one kit remaining for you to choose. So you can go ahead, click buy now on that kit, and then get on with the install. So let's get started. First question on our question funnel is, what width of belt should you buy? There are kits for 1.5 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, and even 4 inch, which is absolutely outrageous. Do not buy a 4 inch belt. It's not the 1990s and early 2000s, guys. We are done with that style. So I'm gonna go ahead and make this as simple as possible for you. You should buy a 1.5 inch belt. But Grease, what if I'm riding an older bike? 1.5 inch belt. What about a newer bike like an Evo like I've got? 1.5 inch belt. It doesn't matter what bike you're riding. You should buy a 1.5 inch belt. This is very, very simple. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, whether you're running it enclosed or open, you're never going to have to worry about fitment issues if you just stick with that super common, super available 1.5 inch width. Also, if you need a replacement belt, 1.5 inch is the most common belt size stocked on every major parts website that you're already buying from. So if you stick with a 1.5 inch, you're always going to be able to find a spare. And then last but not least, I know this part is subjective, but 1.5 inch looks the best. So stick with that 1.5 inch width and take all those other kits and cross them off your list. We're narrowing it down. The next question we need to ask ourselves when we're looking for the right belt kit is, what transmission is on your bike? The reason I say what transmission and not what engine is because these belt drive kits are made and marketed to fit specific transmissions, not to fit specific engines. The reason for that is because the crankshaft spline on the Harley Davidson motors did not change very much over the course of the different production years. And if we are going to look at the kits as a guide for when those year differences were, the only change in the motor side of the kits is from 1936 to 1955. Those belt drive kits have a front pulley that's made to fit a tapered engine shaft. All of the kits for 55 and onward are made with spline shafts on the front pulley. So it does not matter if you're dealing with a panhead, a shovel head, an Evo, all of the spline shafts are going to be the same on the motor side. What matters is what transmission you're dealing with in the back. So finding out what transmission is in your bike is super, super important, and it's the next question you need to ask yourself. Once you know the year range for that transmission, go ahead and jot that down, and you can cross all the other year ranges of the kits off of your list. The next question we need to ask ourselves is, are you going to be dealing with a kickstart only setup or an electric start setup? Now, some of you might be thinking, well, on my bike, I have a kickstart and an electric start. Is that a third category? No, it's not a third category. You either need the electric starter on the kit or you don't need the electric starter on the kit. These companies making these belt drives are not here to judge how often you choose to press the button versus kickstarting the bike. Besides, we all know you're just going to press the button anyway, so use the electric starter if you have the electric starter, or use the kick-only option if that's what you have. But it's important that you decide now whether you're going to retain the electric start or not, because the kits are a little different. What is different about the electric start kits is they have what's called a ring gear. Now I'll roll in a clip right here showing you what that ring gear looks like. It's these teeth on the outside of the clutch basket. And now for reference, I'll show you my clutch basket, which does not have a ring gear because it is not made to work with an electric starter. And I could not put an electric starter on this bike without buying a different kit that actually accommodates one. So you have to make the decision. Kit with the ring gear or kit without the ring gear. The next question that we need to ask ourselves is, are you going to run an open primary or are you going to run a closed primary? And the reason that we have to ask this question is not specific to which kit you buy, but it does have an implication for what other parts you're going to need with your kit. So let's talk about that. If you choose to run an open primary with this belt drive, you will need 2 additional pieces to get the best use out of that open primary. You are going to need a transmission support bracket, which is the part you're seeing on the screen right here. And what this piece does is it takes up the space that was previously occupied by your inner primary. If you've ever seen an inner primary, you know it's kind of a thick piece of aluminum that goes in between the motor and the transmission. So when you take that off to run an open setup, you need to fill that gap. And this transmission support bracket is what does that. So for open primary setups, you have to buy the bracket. One other part that you don't need 100%, but I highly recommend you get is an adjustable transmission plate. I bought mine from Paco off eBay. I think I paid about 80 bucks for it. And what this does is it gives you adjustment screws on the back of your transmission plate that allow you to fine tune where that transmission is sitting front to back on the plate. Now you might be thinking, well, Grease, doesn't the stock transmission plate have slots that let you slide the transmission back and forth? Very good. It does indeed have slots, but what's tricky about this is that once you get that belt drive on there and you're trying to pull that transmission back to get the tension of the belt correct, it can be really hard to do that, hold it in place under tension, and then go underneath it and do the nuts up. This is where the adjustable transmission plate is super key. It's got 2 screws in the back. You put an Allen key in those, you spin the screw tighter. This slides the transmission back. You check your tension, make adjustments as needed, and it never slides back forward on you. So as far as the transmission plate, I highly recommend it. As far as the bearing support bracket, you absolutely need it. Now let's talk about the closed primary setups. If you are running a belt drive in a closed primary setup, one, I highly recommend, like I mentioned in the first question, that you get a 1.5 inch belt. It's the thinnest of the belts, and it will make sure that it'll actually fit under your stock primary cover. Once you start getting into 2 inch, and definitely once you get into 3 inch, you're going to start having clearance issues with getting that belt to fit under your stock cover. It's going to be a total nightmare, and there's absolutely no reason why you would not just get the 1.5. So make sure you get the 1.5, especially if you're going closed. In addition to that, these belts will generate heat as they spin around on these pulleys. Your stock primary doesn't have any vent holes in it because it previously was a wet clutch system that didn't need any vent holes, or it would just end up leaking out of the vent holes. But now that you are going to a belt drive primary, you need to create some vent holes. So what I've done here is I just went to Google and I grabbed a couple pictures. I'll roll them in on the screen right now, showing you a couple options for how you could drill some creative holes in your primary to make sure that it's vented. From what I understand, you don't need to go crazy with these holes. You just need a little bit of airflow to breeze on through there so that that belt doesn't get so hot that it just ends up overheating and snapping or melting, or whatever belts do when you don't drill vent holes in your primary. So while you don't need any extra parts when you're going with the closed setup, you will need to make some modifications in your case. In addition to that, one thing I wanted to mention is that I did speak to a couple people who said that in order to get the belt to fit inside their stock inner primary, they had to grind away some of the webbing, some of the casting lines, if you will, that are on the inside of your primary in order to give clearance to that belt to fit. So just be aware that if you are going with a closed primary, that might be something that you need to do. I can't say for sure. Hopefully one of you guys can go down in the comments below if you are running a closed primary belt. Please let us know, did you have to grind those webbings out, or did it just fit in the way that it's supposed to? Before we get into the next question in our question funnel, I just want to give you a quick reminder that if you're enjoying this video and you're enjoying this channel and you appreciate all these free videos that I make for you to help you skip the struggle, please click that subscribe button and share the channel with a friend so that other people can find these videos. It helps me to grow the channel so I can do bigger, cooler projects in the future. Next question on our question funnel is 8mm, 11mm, or 14mm. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these kits are marketed in those 3 different sizes, and this is a very commonly misunderstood question. And oftentimes, people don't even know what that 8mm or 11mm is even measuring on the kits, and it's just generally confusing. And I have to agree with you. The way these kits are marketed and the way that that is explained in the description is awful. They really don't go into depth on a lot of this. So let me just tell you briefly. What that measurement is from the center of one tooth of the belt to the center of the next tooth on the belt. That is what that measurement is calling out. So an 8mm belt is what I have on my bike, and it's 8mm from tooth to tooth. The 11mm kit, as you might imagine, is 11mm from tooth to tooth. I don't see a ton of 14mm kits out there, but I did read it on BDL's website that they make them in 14mm. So which size should you choose? Here's where the video is going to get controversial. I have done as deep a dive as a person can do. I have called distributors, spoken to people, spoken to customer service. Nobody has been able to give me a good answer as to why someone would buy an 8 versus an 11mm kit. I've heard people talk about more contact area, more surface area for gripping. And if you're interested in that, just again, look at that ruler, 8mm versus 11mm. How much difference this makes? Man, I really couldn't tell you, and I really don't think it matters a ton. So how am I going to advise you on the 8mm versus 11mm versus 14mm debate? I'm going to tell you to look at the other questions we've talked about in the funnel, work your way down to this question, and then get what is available and what is affordable. Because when you are going down the road at 70 miles an hour, you are not going to feel the difference between 11mm and 8mm. You're just going to be happy you have a nice, reliable, functional belt drive that you don't have to do a lot of maintenance on. The next question in our list is whether you want to get in idler gear or no idler gear. Now, I'll tell you right now, this is another one that was a total mystery. You see this listed in a description. You see this little piece, and it says this one comes with an idler gear. This one doesn't come with an idler gear. But what is the idler gear? What does it even do? Again, I had to spend some time on the phone with a couple different people from customer service just to verify. And so far as I can understand it, the idler gear is essentially a tension adjuster that functions exactly the same way that your stock adjuster functions. I'll roll in a clip right here showing the inner primary, and it has this sort of toothed piece that allows you to raise or lower a shoe, which tensions on the stock setup, your primary chain, and on this setup, it tensions your belt. So these kits that come with an idler gear are basically kits that allow you to make manual adjustments to the tension of your belt in the event that you're not running an open primary, because if you had an open primary, there'd be no reason to have an idler gear. Us guys with open primaries, you just slide the transmission back or forward, and that adjusts your belt tension. So if your plan is to have an open primary, you can cross this off your list right off the bat. You do not have the capacity to run the idler gear because you don't have anything to bolt it to, so that's off your list. But if you're running a closed primary, obviously you can't slide the transmission because it's bolted to the engine. Here's my advice to you on this. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm going to go ahead and put that out right off the bat. I don't work for any of these belt drive companies. I didn't design these belts, but here's what I will say. I don't recommend that you get one with an idler gear. The reason I don't recommend it is because when these companies make these kits, they are designing these kits to go into the spaces of an inner primary, and they make the belt to an appropriate length that it should not need manual adjustment. I think that by adding this idler gear in here, you are running the risk of over tightening your belt or just adding more friction. Now you've got this belt is running over and it's constantly dragging on the belt as the belt is spinning. I just don't see the reason for it. There are plenty of people who run belt drive primaries in closed applications and never need the idler gear. So why add the extra piece to the system? So whether it's open or closed, I recommend no idler gear. If you really feel strongly that you want the ability to make those tension adjustments on your closed primary setup, you can go ahead and get one. So by this point, after all these questions, it is very likely that you have narrowed it down now to only one kit and are ready to make the purchase. But then the final decision comes into play, and the final question we need to ask ourselves, which is, do you buy a pre-packaged kit, or do you collect these parts separately from other sources? Never was there a tale of greater woe than that of the open belt swap meet, bro. Trust me when I say this. I have seen so many people make this mistake. They go to the swap and they say, here's an open primary for sale, and they scoop it up, they get it home, and nothing fits. None of it works. You're sitting and looking at all these parts, just trying to decide if they were ever even meant to go together in the first place. I have met a lot of people that run open primaries and deal with these belt drives. And believe me, many of these people struggle even with the kit itself. And that's with all parts that are meant to go together, made for each other with the appropriate drive ratio. And it still can throw some people for a loop and be a little difficult to install. So why you would decide to then also further complicate the process by hodgepodging parts together and hoping for the best is beyond me. I highly, highly recommend that you value your time, value your sanity, buy the kit, and make this easier for yourself. Now that you know all the questions you need to ask yourself, I'm just going to briefly take you through what I bought and why I bought what I did. What I'm running on my bike is the BDL Open Primary Kit. The manufacturer part number for this particular kit on my bike is 6141SK4. I'll go ahead and put that down here so you can read it. The way that this kit is sold and marketed online is the 79 to 84 4-speed shovel head kickstart only. Remember I said back earlier, you have to go by what transmission you have. Those of you who have been watching the channel for a long time, you know I have a 94 Evo Softail as the engine in my bike, but I have a late model shovel head, the cow pie or rotary top if you prefer. Transmission is what's in my bike. And even though I bought the kit for the shovel head, it still fits the Evo because, again, those engine shafts are all the same. They're all a spline shaft. So I have the shovel head kit on my bike, 4-speed kickstart only. This means I have no ring gear on the clutch basket. I'll roll in a shot right here so you can see it. And this kit bolted up beautifully. Honestly, I had no problems getting this kit installed on the bike. One weird thing I will say about the kit is I can't find anywhere on BDL's website that says what the drive ratio is on this and how it compares to stock, but I can just tell you that in riding the stock setup and in riding this setup, I can't feel any sort of difference whatsoever. I really have no complaints with the way it rides. For anybody who knows how to do the math, which is far too smart for me to do, I have a 61 tooth rear pulley and I have a 41 tooth front pulley. And the belt that comes in the kit is 132 tooth. Again, this is an 8mm kit and it is a 1.5 inch width. Hopefully this video helps take some of the guesswork out of which kit you should buy. If you're still having trouble with it, feel free to leave a message down in the comments and hopefully either me or other people who know a lot more than I do can chime in to potentially clarify some of what I've said in this video or to answer specific questions that come up with your application. If you have one of these kits on your bike, but you want to learn a neat little trick on how to use a simple washer to get your clutch off in half the time, make sure you click on this video right here where I will walk you through what washer you need and how to stop dealing with those annoying clutch springs that can be such a pain when you're trying to take your clutch plates out. Thanks again for watching Grease's Garage, and I will catch you guys next week.